What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero, putting America first, second, and third. Here is the host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show here. It's Wednesday, June 1st, 2011, and this is our debut show here on the Rents Radio Network, as probably going to be inevitable with any first time we're doing anything. We're having a little bit of technical issues we're trying to work out. Actually, we've got this little hamster that's in this wire wheel behind the mixer board, and he's still jet-lagged from the move, and we're having some issues. We're going to try and sort them out as we move along here. So I want to say hello, first of all, to our audience that followed us over from the other place, and greetings to our new audience, and to all of the spaceships parked near the Galaxy 19 communications satellite tapping into the show and asking themselves, isn't this supposed to be Paul Drockton? And it used to be, but Paul has graciously moved his show 1 hour earlier in the day in order to make room for our program to come in here. So thanks to Paul for doing that and basically clearing the decks for us. Now, if you're new to the show and you have no idea who I am, my name is Michael Rivero. And I've been in the Patriot community for a long time. I'm former NASA, former visual effects wizard in film and television. I've been kicked out of Hollywood twice now for speaking truth to power. I'm webmaster of the website whatreallyhappened.com. And I've been a blogger since before the word even existed, and a talk show radio host for 4 years now. And Jeff Rentz and I go back a long way to a common root at another network which shall remain nameless, and we both sort of went our ways, and now we're reconverging here. I'm anti-war, anti-Federal Reserve, anti-IMF, anti-globalist, anti-snake oil, pro-peace, pro-prosperity, and pro-decentralization. As I mentioned before, this is June 1st. June is bursting out all over, except here. We just had a thunder shower go over, and it's very cold here. The Rose Festival held in Portland over this last Memorial Day weekend, they had to deal with snow. And despite all of this, record snow, record flooding from the record melt from the record snow, the carbonazis are still out there pushing global warming, the need for a global environmental authority funded by carbon taxes. Down in Australia, they got Kate Blanchett to come out there and say, oh, yes, you've got to have a carbon tax, to pay for your sins in making the planet warmer. And, of course, that did not go over very, very well. Working-class Australians really resent a multimillionaire actress telling them that they have to pay more for fuel and food to keep the planet from warming up when they're heading into their third record cold winter in a row here. Now, speaking of Memorial Day, I don't know, maybe it's just me and maybe I'm getting hypersensitive, but it seems to be that most of the remembrance of Memorial Day were the come-ons from the shopping malls and the sales, Memorial Day sale down at whatever, and go buy a car, go buy a washing machine, go buy white sales. And I've been around the world. I've been to Europe, and I've seen holidays in other countries. I had the very great joy of experiencing Christmas in the Marienplatz in Munich, Germany some years ago, where it really felt like it was a holiday and a celebration, and it wasn't just another marketing come-on. And it seems to me, whether you support the wars or not, or whether you support our men and women in uniform or not, it seems to me that the way Memorial Day was treated by our corporate media was very thin and very shallow, bordering on the disrespectful. And I don't know how you felt about it. If you'd like to call in and share your opinion, our lines are open right now, 877-342-6673, 877-342-6673. Brett is in the control room, twiddling the dials and keeping us out of trouble, and hopefully keeping everything working together despite the hamster. Now, again, getting back to this whole thing about American holidays just being a come-on into the shopping centers, and I don't know about you, but when I see the Christmas decorations and stuff starting to show up in the stores in August, that really bothers me, because by the time December rolls around, I'm totally burned out. It's not decoration anymore, it's just decor, and it's really chintzy. And if you are as old as I am, you probably remember this wonderful movie, George Lucas's first movie, before he did Star Wars. He did a movie called THX 1138, was his student film. Then it was remade into a feature, and then he just did a director's release cut, I think, 2 years ago. And there's this wonderful scene in there where the protagonist is in this confessional. It's all automated and all computerized, and there's this light-up screen of their religious icon, and the character's trying to confess about how everything is just not working in his life. And this religious image is saying, yes, spend more, buy, be happy. And that was the whole thing, to just keep people working, keep them productive, keep them spending money, keep them supporting the system. And when it comes to, buying and spending money, especially that does not belong to them, nobody is happier buying and spending your money than the United States Congress, the finest Congress that money can buy. And it is a positive note, I think, that the House yesterday refused to raise the debt ceiling, because even Congress critters understand, past a certain point, that, you can't just get another credit card to solve all your problems. You really, really can't. And the nation is so deep in debt. Your portion of the government debt that they ran up without your permission is about $250,000, or for a family of four, $1 million plus accruing interest, and that is not counting all the money spent to try and cover up for Wall Street's mortgage-backed security fraud, which is the biggest financial swindle since the Great South Seas Bubble of 1721. And every time we start hearing about austerity and everything, they talk about, cutting back money for schools, cutting back money for roads and hospitals. And, yes, Wall Street went on a gambling binge and lost a ton of money, so we got to turn around and we got to slap around those public worker unions and teach them what it means to be an American. I mean, things are getting so bad that FEMA is now asking all those Katrina hurricane survivors for the money back. Remember all the money that went down to help them deal with this catastrophe, which wouldn't have happened if the flood control had been properly maintained. And now FEMA's like knocking on the doors and say, well, we kind of need that money back now. We're going to go to the phones. We've got George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just want to say I've missed you being in radio exile.
Well, it was kind of a vacation. It wasn't really an exile.
But boy, I was hoping to look for you on the air when we found out that the Lieutenant Governor torpedoed the anti-TSA groping bill. I was hoping you'd be on breathing fire.
Well,
I'm glad you're. Okay.
Well, I thought about going on there, but the situation basically, I didn't really have the radio network, and I didn't feel like going on the TV was going to do anything because everybody kind of knew I was on vacation. But it is interesting, I did comment on it at whatreallyhappened.com that basically the TSA has engaged in its own act of terrorism against the people of Texas, because any kind of a threat that is designed to change political policy is defined as an act of terror under the USA Patriot Act. And so now we know who the biggest terrorists in the country are. It's the U.S. government, it's the TSA, it's the Department of Homeland Security. Certainly it's the TV media that goes on screaming about how, do what the government says or the bad guys are going to get you.
Exactly. And, the thing is, it's more like many Texans, when they found out this, they had the attitude, bring it on, bring it on. They wanted to see what the federal government would do.
Well, I know most of the Texans definitely did, and this situation is not going to go away. But as I've mentioned many, many times, the problem with your state government and your county government and your local government, they all see their positions as basically being a training ground for federal service. Everybody who's in a state government, they're not looking at their own people. They're looking at the next step up on their career path, which is to Washington, D.C. And so usually when it comes down to a conflict between the federal government and the rights of ordinary Americans, the state governments tend to side with the federal government unless there's really a huge financial penalty for doing so.
Well, I just got I even told my state representative, it's like you work for us, you don't work for the federal government. And I really bluffed it out. I said, she goes, I really wanted to vote for it, but we would have got, the skies above Texas would have had no plans above it. And here's the thing is, for people who compromise, who cower in politics, it's the most dangerous place to be, because history has recorded even people who are loyal and even people who just went along, and even people who just cowered, thinking that the wolf will pass them by the door in a tyranny, find out that they will share a mass grave ditch with the rest of the peasants when the time comes, when they're done using them. And they don't seem to realize that.
No, they really don't. And I think a lot of us were grown up with this idea that the federal government was the ultimate authority in the country, and that certainly was not the way the country was set up. where the states had the power and the federal government existed for no other reason than common defense and arbiter between the states, and everything else was left to local jurisdictions. Unfortunately, the federal government has definitely exceeded its constitutional mandate and seeks to simply impose more control over all of our lives, and it's reached absolutely ridiculous extremes now. And in order to keep the government growing and justifying more taxation and more control, they're looking for more and more things to control about your life. Now they're trying to tell you what you can eat and what you can't eat. And we're not talking about stuff that is a serious threat to public health. We're talking about, this use of the carbon footprint to say, you must go eat this, you must buy that, you must do this, you must have this kind of light bulb in your house. Even Adolf Hitler did not go into people's homes in Germany and say, you can't have that kind of light bulb, you must use this other kind over here. All right, so we got to take a little break here. George in Texas, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Chuck from Virginia. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Oh, Mr. Rivero, thank you very much for taking my call. I just would like to initially say that I listen to you every single day, and you're doing a fantastic job. You're a wealth of information. I just wanted to at least initially thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm very, very concerned, as so many of us are, about upcoming potential internet censorship, internet control. It's a very scary thing. The internet, as you have mentioned, is sort of comparable to the printing press. And when the printing press, Gutenberg and so forth, came out, the powers that be back then fought tooth, hook, and nail to prevent the public from, reading on their own and so forth. And now finally the powers that be these days are finally waking up to the fact that the internet is about the only thing that we have for free press, and there have been various bills introduced and so forth. I was wondering if you could, I've been trying my best to keep up on it, and I was wondering if you could give a synopsis of what you know has been introduced recently. In other words, what are they trying to do now to control the internet?
Well,
I'm having a tough time keeping up with it.
Well, the current push right now is that Barack Obama is trying to start a new cybersecurity initiative, as much as a campaign issue that he can run on in 2012 as anything else. But the real goal is to basically bring the internet under some form of centralized control, where the government can basically allow certain things to proceed out to the public, like online shopping, and block other things from reaching the public. The way the internet was originally designed, back in the days when it was the ARPANET, it was specifically designed so that it couldn't be shut down. It was designed to survive literally a nuclear attack and lose as much as 1/3 of its entire structure, and the rest would still be working.
Yeah, pretty much decentralized.
Absolutely decentralized.
They made it pretty, yeah.
But the public was never...
Well, I've been hearing about... No, I'm sorry.
No, the public was never supposed to have access to this net, but of course, as popular as it is, it got out there, and now it's the web and everything, and the government's trying to figure out some way they can get it back under control, but the inherent structure works against that. So what the government is going to try and do is come up with some kind of a big scary monster like online terrorism, and they're always waving about, sexual predators online at us to try and get us to say, okay, we're going to switch over to Internet 2, which is going to be run like a television network, where there's somebody in a control room that decides what the public can see and what the public can't see.
Right, Internet 2, I've been reading about that. Yeah, they always have a way of... bringing the children into it. We have to protect the children. The baby kissing bit. Very predictable. Yeah, well, so you can pretty much put this under a, quote, cybersecurity initiative, unquote, I suppose. And just find so many different things. And, this is our last avenue of free speech. And I think my personal opinion is that they made some real serious actions to really clamp down on it that they do. They're going to have an uproar that is just going to go up to the people are just going to scream. I would imagine they're using China as their goal.
Well, that didn't work out too well because Cisco routers made a deal with the Chinese government to build internet filtering right into the routers on the backbone of the Chinese section of the internet, and Chinese hackers almost immediately found a way around that. And the reality is, again, it's fundamental to the nature of the structure of the internet that it is not subject to interference and control. A lot of people are trying to do that.
Control, yeah.
We had this situation a couple of weeks ago where there was what is called DNS name server spoofing, where somebody broke in to alter the routing tables on the name servers around the world and then staged a denial of service attack against DirectNIC in order to delay the automated repair system from being able to operate. And
I heard you mentioning that.
Yeah, and it may have been a test to see about being able to shut down the net to a degree where the public would accept a complete transition of the net into something that has government control for our own good. But it's absolutely an attempt to turn the internet into just another version of a TV network where the communication really is all pretty much one way.
Internet too, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's something we're just all going to have to keep up on, and you have been covering this quite well. I'm sorry to repeat myself, but you're just doing an absolutely fantastic job. I've become very appreciative. So thank you for your efforts, and God bless.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for those kind sentiments there. Let's see. I think the phone lines are clear right now. I'm going to start moving on, talking about some other things. Obviously, the economic news continues to be really, really bad. Manufacturing activity is at a 20-month low. Today was like the worst day for the Dow this entire year. Housing prices are starting to go into the second of the double dip, so more and more people are going to find themselves underwater with regard to their mortgages, and will probably start walking away from their mortgages as well. That's just going to accelerate the problem here. And, it's kind of interesting. They're trying to bring back debtor's prison. The U.S. government cannot actually fix the economy. In some cases, it doesn't even look like they're really trying so much as, grabbing as much as they can from the people and putting it in their own pockets and, of course, bailing Wall Street out from that mortgage-backed security fraud. But they're waving around debtor's prisons. Yes, you will give us all your money or we'll throw you in jail. And the important part you need to remember, folks, is they created the debt for you with this private central bank that issues all currency as a form of debt bearing interest. And the trap of that is that the instant that first paper note goes into circulation, more money is owed to the bank than actually exists. You can't get out of that debt. We'll be right back. And aloha, America, and welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the economy. U.S. consumer sentiment has fallen to a 6-month low on the job outlook. And, there are a lot of people out of work. I saw a line down at the shopping mall the other day where there was apparently like one job available, and the line went for like 100 yards. Just hundreds of people trying to find some work there. And everybody's pointing fingers back and forth. But ultimately, the reason the United States has come to ruin has to do with the private central bank, which was never the way the country was supposed to operate. The country began with the government issuing its own currency free of interest for the public to use. And the bankers, who cannot stand the idea of people having access to money that they don't have to pay interest on, has come in and through bribery and corruption and coercion has cursed this country with 3 private central banks, and all 3 brought the nation to the edge of ruin. Fortunately, the first 2 times, we had leaders who had the strength of courage and moral purpose and principle to bring those first 2 private central banks to a crashing end and to restore to the people of the United States of America a government-issued currency based on value, not on debt, which is what made America great. But in 1913, a corrupt Congress and a corrupt president signed us all into the slavery of a private central bank called the Federal Reserve System that is designed to extract all the real wealth of the nation and put it in the pockets of the bankers. And all they have to provide in return for it is pieces of paper with pretty ink all over it that represent absolutely nothing. And that is the problem, because when that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to that private bank than is actually in existence. And that's why you can never get out of that debt trap, and that's why the debt continues to grow. And as long as that bank can find larger and larger pools of new borrowers, like college students, with which to justify the creation of new paper money to pay the interest on the old paper money, the system will float along. But it's a pyramid scheme. It's a Ponzi scheme, and it always has been. And when you run out of new borrowers, when the American people are saying, we're too deep in debt, we're trying to get out of debt, and the Federal Reserve goes, horrors! They can't get out of debt. If they get out of debt, there won't be any money. And so they go to their buddies in the government and say, you have to borrow on behalf of the American people. And the U.S. government says, certainly, just sign a few campaign checks for the next election, and we'll borrow billions and billions of dollars, and we'll call it TARP, or we'll call it the bailout, or we'll call it assistance program. And it'll be trillions of dollars, and we'll just print it up, and you just spend it wherever you want, and it will increase the total debt, but it will keep the system going along for one more generation, and then it's the next administration's problem to solve. And so the fact that the House of Representatives refused to raise the debt ceiling is basically a recognition. We've come to the end of this pyramid scheme. It has to crash, sooner or later. Probably better sooner. But for everybody who's out there who's struggling in debt, you didn't do anything wrong. This was done to you. Because back in 2005, when it began to be obvious that the mortgage-backed security fraud being perpetrated by Wall Street was going to start coming apart, the U.S. federal government made a conscious decision to take your high-paying jobs away from you. That's why all these corporations were getting these tax incentives under the Bush administration and accelerating under Obama to encourage the offshoring of high-paying jobs to other countries. It really is that simple. The government took your jobs to make it easier for the banks to take your homes, so the banks could put those homes on their balance sheets to stay solvent. The banks aren't interested in that little monthly payment you're making. That can't save them. They needed the entire value of the house in one lump to go on that balance sheet so that they could basically start writing out checks and buy back all that bad paper they've been selling all around the world to places like Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse and the Bank of Libya. That's the reason, everybody's saying, oh, how come the Federal Reserve was giving money to the Bank of Libya? It wasn't giving the money to the Bank of Libya. It never gave the money to anybody. It's buying back fraudulent investments in order to keep the Wall Street crooks from having to go to jail. Now, of course, Iceland did this a little bit differently. Okay? They took the bankers who had destroyed their economy and they threw them in jail. And then they took the government that helped the bankers do it and they fired that government. And their economy is already headed back up again. So there is the object lesson. If we go along looting the American people to prop up Wall Street will continue with its criminal ways because it has no reason to change. It works for them. They're getting all the money, record bonuses, and the American people are getting poorer and poorer and poorer. And as long as we sit there and say, yeah, I guess that's the way it's supposed to be, then yes, that is the way it was supposed to be. That's the way it will be. So we're coming up on a crisis moment. And today's shock on the Dow may be the first signal. You can't keep a pyramid going forever. Nobody ever has. This one's been going for almost 100 years, and it looks to be coming apart. And for all those people who are out there who are suffering and struggling, who have seen the proceeds of a lifetime of work for themselves, for their families, for their children just dissolve in their hands, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything. It was done to you. It was done to you by the money junkies who have to have more and more money. They've already got more money than they could ever spend, but it's not enough for them. It's addictive behavior, like a heroin junkie or a cocaine junkie or a meth junkie. These are money junkies. Look at Bernie Madoff over there, co-founder of NASDAQ. More money than any one human being could ever spend in their life. And he still had to set up a Ponzi scheme and cheat his investors out of another $65 billion. If you ask him why he did it, he can't explain it. He just had to have more zeros behind his name. We need to recognize that that kind of behavior that we see in Wall Street, that we see in Washington, D.C., it's not mentally healthy behavior. It's addictive behavior. We need an intervention. We need a Betty Ford clinic for money junkies. We need to wean them away from their addiction, because they're causing a lot of damage to society around them. Just like when you see heroin junkies or cocaine junkies, and you see the damage and the heartbreak they bring to their families and their local community and everybody around them. Look at the damage the money junkies are doing, have done to this country. And nobody wants to stand up to them and say, I think you're not behaving in a way that is consistent with the long-term best interest of society as a whole. And they'll come back and they say, I'm not interested in society as a whole. Adam Smith said, as long as I'm taking care of my own greed, society will somehow move forward all on its own. Of course, the mathematician Nash proved that was wrong. That was his doctoral thesis. But the Wall Street money junkies, they just love to keep hearing that stuff. All right, I want to go on here now about the situation over there in Japan at the Fukushima nuclear power plant, because this is a deteriorating situation. The IAEA, which finally, after about 80 days, has shown up in Japan to take a look at the ruined power station. And I want to make a little bit of a point here, because had the IAEA been inspecting real nuclear power stations all along, instead of running around Iraq and Iran looking for mythical, non-existent nuclear weapons, this whole disaster might have been avoided. But I guess they're operating under the theory of better late than never. And they have shown up, and now Japan is finally owning up to what really happened. We're going to tell you about that when we come back from these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America, and welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about the reactors over at Fukushima. The power station there was destroyed by the quake. Apparently was in trouble even before the tsunami hit. The tsunami just sort of riled things up a little bit more. And from that day to this, we have basically been mushroomed by the American media, by TEPCO, by Japan, even by the U.S. government, in that they're basically trying to keep us all in the dark and feed us on garbage. And we have had this ludicrous propaganda campaign by the American corporate media, where we had Jim Cramer over at CNBC saying, it's not going to be Chernobyl. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. Now, we understand why he did that, because these reactors that failed so dramatically were all designed by General Electric, and General Electric owns CNBC, MSNBC, NBC, the whole thing, and a lot of other media, and they spend a lot of money on advertising, like that line dance commercial. And they're going around right now saying, don't report on this whole reactor thing, or we'll take our advertising dollars someplace else. And the corporate media, being the corporate media, goes along with that, because General Electric still wants to go on selling more of these reactors, and they're looking at all these nations that are starting to say, we have to rethink this nuclear technology. Because 3 strikes and you're out. Strike number 1 was 3 Mile Island. Strike number 2, Chernobyl. Strike number 3, Fukushima. So desperate to downplay this disaster has the media been that Ann Coulter actually went out and tried to sell the idea that radiation was actually good for you, using the same kind of mathematics, I guess, that they're using to prove that the globe is still warming up and global warming is the reason we're having harsh winters. And it's just an absolute joke. There is no level of radiation that is really safe. There is only radiation that is at such a low level that you'll probably die of something else before the radiation symptoms show up. So for people my age, I'm not personally worried that Fukushima is going to inconvenience my life, even though my own radiation meter is showing that we are definitely above the normal baseline, the pre-Fukushima baseline. But for the next generation, that's a problem. If you look at the numbers of severe birth defects around Chernobyl, since that happened 25 years ago, if you look at the epidemic of severe birth abnormalities that have inflicted the children of returning U.S. veterans that have handled these depleted uranium munitions, and they're having an unusual high number of severe birth defects in their children, and you begin to understand that all this radiation that is pouring into the environment it's going to be the next generation. The unborn children will pay a hideous price for the recklessness. A lot of bad decisions were made. General Electric's design is so weak that 3 of their top scientists resigned rather than sign their name to this particular design. And there seems to be a lot of other issues with it. Certainly putting the spent fuel rod pools right next to the actual reactor, I think, was a very, very weak design. And again, we find out that a lot of these decisions are made in the interest of saving money. Again, it's the money junkie behavior. Oh, we don't need the extra spare backup thing. Well, now that the IAEA is in there and actually inspecting, Japan has finally had to come clean, and they have confirmed what outside observers had intuited all along. There were meltdowns to varying degrees in reactors 1, 2, and 3, and the containment vessels, the outer vessel, safety vessel, was also damaged in all 3 of those reactors. That's Chernobyl. That's a meltdown. That's China syndrome. And the real problem, of course, is not the radiation leaking into the air, but the radiation leaking into the Pacific Ocean. And we've already got the FDA out there saying, we don't need to test Pacific seafood. You're just being silly. And the U.S. government basically is handling Fukushima the way they handled the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster. They can't fix it. They can't make the problem go away. They can't use it to justify war on those gosh darn Arab Muslims. And they can't figure out a way to tax you for it. So they're just going to pretend it's not an issue, especially as we head into an election year. And there's been a lot of Japan bashing going on about the mismanagement of the plants and karma and the rest of it. And yes, the Japanese did make quite a few bad decisions, but those reactors are American designed and in some of the cases American built. And they failed living up to the standards that basically was in the sales brochure. They did not withstand the forces that it was claimed that they would withstand, and the emergency cooling systems had problems. They couldn't get some of the systems to work. Now, maybe that was General Electric. Maybe it was the Stuxnet virus. Because remember, that Stuxnet virus, which the U.S. is now in the point of neither confirming or denying that they had anything to do with it. But that Stuxnet virus was designed to wreck nuclear power stations, specifically the one in Iran, by attacking the Siemens controllers that are kind of a standard feature of industrial plants around the world. And we know that Stuxnet got out of Iran, went all across China and Asia, and it was documented being in Japan in the area of the Fukushima power station last November. So we still need to find out if that computer worm, if the fanatical attempt to get those gosh darn Iranians may have inadvertently contributed to the Fukushima disaster and turned what should have been normal automatic shutdowns of 3 reactors into an absolute total China syndrome meltdown. We need to find out. We do know for a fact we're not getting hard information from the TV networks, from Japan's government, from the U.S. government. We're having to basically go in and ferret this stuff out for ourselves. But at this point, Japan is now admitting what the alternative media was saying all along. Reactors 1, 2, and 3 suffered meltdowns and containment vessel breaches. So, this is just incredibly, incredibly dangerous. Germany says they're going to shut down all nuclear plants by 2022. Japan is rethinking their future of nuclear power. And do I think fission power can be made safe? Yeah, I do. Do I think fission power can be made safe when the money junkies are making the safety decisions? No, I do not. There is a different way to have nuclear power. It's called the thorium cycle reactor. Cannot be diverted into weapons. Does not have anywhere near the toxic waste disposal problem that we're looking at that was a contributing factor at Fukushima. They had this huge buildup of nuclear fuel rods, spent fuel rods. They didn't know where to take them. They were just letting them pile up. And they're a big part of the problem, a big part of the contamination there. Why don't we have thorium cycle reactors? Well, we could have. If you took all the money that the U.S. government borrowed and spent to save Wall Street from having to go to jail for the mortgage-backed security fraud, we could have built thorium cycle power stations in 130 American cities. Talk about ending the energy crisis, especially as more and more people are getting electric cars. And if you want to get away from having to be dependent on foreign oil and wage war for those foreign oil fields, that would have been the way to go. But the U.S. government made the decision instead to save Wall Street from its own criminality. And the money is gone, and we don't have anything for it, except some really expensive wristwatches walking up and down Wall Street right now, where they chow down on those $150 hamburgers at lunch. So, anyway, moving right along here, the U.S. government has expressed concern over freedom of assembly in Russia. Have you noticed how every time the U.S. government gets in trouble, the first thing they do is they start pointing fingers at other countries and saying, oh, look, they're in violation of human rights. They're doing bad things. And it's a way of simply diverting attention from the fact that the U.S. government is engaging in unconstitutional and illegal behavior. And I point this out because at the same time the U.S. is expressing their concern over freedom of assembly in Russia, we have this very bizarre story where people were arrested at the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. for dancing. And it wasn't a lewd dance. In one case, it was just a husband and wife who were holding each other and just kind of swinging back and forth. And the blue shirts, Hitler had the brown shirts, we have the blue shirts. The blue shirts came in and started screaming, you can't do that, it's against the law. And the people said, okay, what law makes it a crime to dance at the Jefferson Memorial? And, of course, the blue shirts didn't actually have the law. Their attitude is, we'll tell you what's legal and what isn't, and you shouldn't be dancing here. And they wind up throwing some of these people down and handcuffing them and taking them to jail. Now, little historical point. Thomas Jefferson himself, when he wasn't busy writing the Declaration of Independence and when he wasn't busy being the President of the United States, loved to dance. He enjoyed dancing, and he played violin. He's a musician. He likes to party. I think dancing, we're not talking lewd dancing or pole dancing or anything like that. We're talking about just a little lighthearted dancing. At the Jefferson Memorial is an homage. Tom would approve, I'm sure. But the blue shirts decided they had to justify their salaries and their badges by grabbing these people and hauling them off. There's going to be a protest dance there again, and we'll see what happens. But it's like this incredibly repressive society we're living in. The TSA's got their hands down in the front of your pants at the airport, and now the blue shirts are saying you can't even dance at the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. The attitude is use a foxtrot, go to jail. It's just amazing how strict the government is trying to be. When they can't have justice, they will bring about order, meaning they'll simply keep you in your place. And it's kind of where it's going. They're just trying to convince you not to stand up, not to fight back, not to speak out, not to express your disgust at where the country is going. Apparently, there's a court case coming up for a decision right now where they may rule that talking back to police is no longer considered protected speech under the First Amendment. You can walk into a funeral and scream that God hates the homosexuals, and that's considered protected speech by the courts. But if you talk to the police and say, I don't think there really is a law that says I can't dance here in Jefferson's Memorial, that they can take you to jail for that, because that's not considered free speech anymore. At least that's the argument we're getting from the state government. Just amazing. Just amazing. It's very scary out there. And, of course, here in Hawaii, the TSA has just destroyed the place. Our tourism has it's all but vanished. The local tourism board likes to say, well, we have an 80% occupancy rate at the hotels, which sounds really good until you realize how many hotels have just been driven completely out of business. And anytime they have a survey about why tourism has dropped in the United States as a whole, and certainly here in Hawaii, it's the same thing. They don't want to have to go through the abusive treatment at the airports. We used to have friends who would come here from Great Britain, and they said, we can't enjoy a vacation in Hawaii. We're treated like a POW everywhere we go. We're going to take a break for station ID and the news, and we'll be right back.
What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to hour number 2 of our show today here. And I want to touch on this one story before we go back to the phone lines. And the headline reads, Egypt in danger of Muslim Brotherhood takeover. And the substance of the article is that sources in Israel are basically saying that what's going on in Egypt isn't what we're all thinking is going on in Egypt. It's dark and it's dangerous. And basically the agenda here is that we should all ignore the will of the people and go in there and force Egypt to have a government that is friendly to Israel, which is what they had in Mubarak. And Israel's very unhappy that Mubarak was kicked out by the Egyptian people, and they're trying to find some way to get the Americans to go back in and sort of reconquer Egypt and say, you will go back to the way things used to be. I don't think that's a tough sell. That's a tough sell. We're going to go to the phones. David in Arkansas. Aloha, David. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I had to call in on your debut here on Rents Network and let you know we're still listening. I'll follow you anywhere.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Enjoy your program more than both of them out here because you really get to the common sense parts of the issues. But I've been thinking about is what happens when this all falls apart, because the system that we're under right now is mathematically unsustainable. The lies that they're pumping out are only bothering the wake up of the population across the entire planet. It's doomed to fail. And what we have to do now is start preparing ourselves to get ready to ride this storm out. And that starts in your own home, making sure you've got enough food and water and supplies to, weather the transition. And then once you're stable, start working in your community. And we don't really have to go too much farther than that right now. But we've got to be ready to start rebuilding this once it comes down. Because if we are not ready to reassert a lawful constitutional civil authority, the carpetbaggers are going to come in, like you said before in previous programs, and it'll end up being a lot worse. So we've got to step up. And it is of dire importance that we start preparing for that, because the collapse of this system is inevitable. Whether the force that we're exerting with efforts like United We Strike or other efforts hasten it or not, it doesn't really matter. It's absolutely unsustainable, and it is going to come down around their ankles. And there isn't anything they can do to stop it. They can just keep propping it up for just a little while longer. But we're starting to see the death throes. They're starting to panic, and they're going to get desperate. The food and fuel costs are going to start skyrocketing, and we've got to be
very much so.
There's nobody can come down out of the sky and save us. We are on our own. We have to protect ourselves. We have to do this for ourselves. And
you're actually closer. You're closer to the solution than you may think, because being able to take care of yourself, that is essential for freedom. If you allow yourself to be lured into being dependent on some large corporation or some large governmental body, they want you to be dependent, because once you're dependent on them, then they can harvest money from you. This is why people in New York are eating lettuce that was trucked in from Los Angeles, and it's a week old, and they don't know how to go about getting their own lettuce from their own local communities. And even today, with the threat to global food supplies from the Gulf of Mexico disaster and Fukushima and the flooding of industrial pollutants into the farmlands of Central America, even still, the corporate mentality is to basically make sure that Americans are not allowed to grow, keep them dependent on that corporate structure in order to keep them working to support it. And so absolutely what everybody needs to be getting ready to do is how to live without a federal government. If you want to be free of a federal government, you start by living as if you don't need one anymore.
Absolutely. It is the solution, and I know that's the solution. But the first thing we've got to do is get our own houses in order first, and then we start, helping, friends, family, and neighbors, and we come together as a community. And if everybody does that in their own communities, we've taken back the entire country. It's as simple as that. We don't have to go after all of these symptoms. This is what we've got to do, pure and simple. I mean, it doesn't get any simpler than that. It's not going to be easy, but easy is what got us into this mess in the first place. There's going to be a lot of, elbow grease and sweat, to make all of this happen, but the rewards that we reap off of that are far in excess of the amount of effort that we have to put into it. We can live sustainable, happy lives, without, having this, big monstrosity of federal government and bureaucracy like we don't need it. And to just quit playing along, quit depending on this crap, because there's absolutely no reason for it, depending on things that are absolutely set up to be detrimental to your health and well-being. Simple as that.
Well, the situation here is that you need, to be free means to be independent, and that means the freedom to basically stand or fall on your own resources. When people left Europe, in order to come here to the United States of America to be free, they came here prepared to basically provide for their own needs and to not need a big government or a big church or a big whatever to be taking care of them. And that was what it meant to be free, was you were responsible for your own life and your own necessities, and you took care of yourself. And you didn't let some nanny state come in and lure you into their clutches by offering to give you things and then basically, chain you up and domesticate you. And we have a T-shirt that we've got around in our store. Are we really civilized, or are we merely domesticated? And I think that's where we are right now. Our government is not trying to build a civilization. They're merely trying to domesticate the humans, to turn them into laborers and warriors and send them off to conquer other people's oil fields. And I don't want to be a domesticated critter anymore.
And neither do I. It's time for us to assert our freedoms and start protecting ourselves and providing for ourselves. It's as simple as that. And that's really about all I got. I could, repeat that 1,500 times, and the story doesn't change. This is what we need to do. Thank you for all you do, Mike. You take care of yourself. Aloha.
All right. Thank you very much. And let's see. Do we have anybody else? Yes, we've got a caller, Karen. Aloha, Karen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hi, Michael Rivero. This is another United We Strike call, but I have to tell you that now you're cutting into my happy hour time.
Well, I apologize deeply, but it wasn't up to me.
No, glad to see you on Rents Radio, and I didn't know David was calling in, but that's good, too. We do need to be self-sufficient. We need to understand that our president is a murderer. He condones it. He's judge, jury, and sends out the execution squad, and we are that execution squad. We can't dance now in public. We can't plant a garden. We can't send our children to school with their lunches, and yet some people think that we're free. It's time to wake up. A giant global economic boycott and strike is definitely called for. The 15th of every month, that's what we do. And one of these days, I am just hoping that people will go, you know what, I've got enough food and water and supplies here. I can hang out for a week, and my job right now is not as important as my children's future and the future of this country, and I'm staying home. Well, if we did that all around the world, we would be heard, and we can rat out the scandals from the inside out, from our local communities out. We don't even need to go any higher than a local constitutional sheriff.
That's right.
And common law will be straighten it up.
Yeah, all government above the county level is really kind of superfluous if you think about it. And I know there's this big push by the globalist money junkies. We want one government and one bank and one monetary unit because that way we can all get rich off the population of the entire planet. But if you really think about it, except for the time when you need to go to war, really, your own local community should be all that you need to produce what you need, to consume what you need, to carry on your business, and have a really decent life. And I think a perfect example of how this globalization has gone hideously wrong, over and above the money junkies, simply, transforming an American economic downturn into a global catastrophe because of all those global interlinks. Look at what's happened to all the Toyota factories here in North America, where they're having to be shut down because they were dependent on parts that were being shipped in all the way from Japan. Why aren't those parts being made in America? Why did we have to let somebody set up a conduit from Japan that they could sit on top of and reap a huge profit just for moving a part from one part of the world to another? And by the way, have you ever thought about the carbon footprint those cargo ships are putting out, and the trains that bring those parts from the harbors to the factories? It's it's not really efficient. It's just a way of monopolizing the product lines to maximize profit. And what we're seeing is we've gone down this path toward centralization way too far, and we need to pull back and change course. We need to decentralize so that we, instead of one giant super corrupted national corporation or global corporation, we need lots and lots of little tiny countries each taking care of themselves. And the only time they should come together in a unit is if one country starts bombing and attacking other people, like, the United States is now doing. Okay?
We do. Yeah, that's exactly it. And, I want to recommend, I don't know if you've seen it yet or not, but New American Century. That is a wonderful documentary, and it is on taxfree15.com. Finally have that up and going with a lot.
Okay, we got to take a break, Karen. We got to take a break. Stay on the phone. We'll be right back.
Michael Rivero.
And Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Karen, are you still there on the line?
I'm here.
Okay. Well, I wanted to wrap up on what you're saying here because right now I think anybody watching the Dow Jones Industrial Average today is going to come to understand that the American economy is incredibly, incredibly fragile. And as a result, we already know the government is hopelessly in debt. The fact that they're still talking about raising the debt ceiling means they can't pay the debts they've got. All they can do is borrow more to keep going. And we know that can't go on forever. But beyond that, we have this very fascistic attitude where the United States is making a promise to foreign investors, where if you put your money in the United States, the U.S. government promises that if you make money, you can keep it. But if you lose any money, we'll make the taxpayers cover the losses. That was the promise that was put out there during the 1980s, during the S&L bailout. That was the demonstration. You could put your money here and invest it in any kind of nonsense you wanted, and when the whole system crashed, we'll just go to the taxpayers and we'll make them cough up the money to make good on all these deposits. Now, we were all told that we were saving widows and pensioners and orphans, but in reality, 90% of the accounts being cleared by the Resolution Trust Corporation were corporate investment accounts. And a lot of them were linked into the CIA's Iran-Contra drug running operation as well. But that was the demonstration. That was where the United States said, you can put your money here, any profits you make you keep, and any losses we'll dump on the American people. And they're doing the same thing again. All of these foreign banks that invested in the Wall Street fraudulent mortgage-backed securities, and some of them made money early on, because it's a pyramid, and the ones who lost a lot of money, they're being paid back from the pockets of the American taxpayer. According to Dylan Ratigan, some $27 trillion so far.
Well, what about all the TARP bailouts? And
yeah, that's all part of it. But here's my point.
That is on Wall Street. That's our money.
Yeah, and here's my point. When the national strike happens, when Americans sit down and say, I'm not going to pay into the system anymore, I'm not going to let you take my money to give to these people who invested in Wall Street without doing their due diligence, and that message gets out that the government can't cover the losses by looting the American people, that's when the foreign investors will start yanking their money, and that's when the whole system's going to come crashing down. For a reformation to succeed in this country, we don't have to march into Washington, D.C. We don't even have to march into Wall Street. All we have to do is be seen to survive long enough, and the system will self-destruct. It took 18 days in Egypt. Probably wouldn't even take that long here in the United States of America to scare off all that foreign investment. And the whole shebang would come crashing down. Confidence in the dollar's already
we need to be careful that we don't get the same items that are back in power in Egypt. We need a whole new cleaning out of those members. We need to get the bankers out of there. We need to get rid of fraudulent debt. We need to bring our military home and stop all military foreign aid. And we could clean up our world very quickly.
Yeah, we really could. Again, all of these evils you're talking about is the money junkie behavior. I don't want to spend money on R&D because I'm not guaranteed a result. It's easier to go and send off somebody else's kids to conquer the oil, and rather than have to come up with the money to buy it. I mean, that's the real reason we're in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and getting ready to go into Iran. It's cheaper to spend other children's blood than the money junkies' gold to actually buy the oil, and that's really what it comes down to. It's the low cost alternative is invasion, and again.
I really do want to encourage everybody who has not seen New American Century. It's right there on taxfree15.com. It's on the front page, and it's a definitive look at how we got here and why we are involved in these wars. And anyone out there who is thinking that sending their children into the military at this time is going to help our country is mistaken. Your patriotism and your love of this country will be used and abused and thrown in your face, and your child will be put through all kinds of horrors because we condone torture, we condone murder. We are not the good guys overseas, and it's time to wake up and take our power back. Individually, we need to empower ourselves and take collective action. The 15th of every month, we have a boycott, folks. Join us, because it's all over the world. And, Michael, thank you for your support, and thank you for taking my call, and congratulations on your move.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the congratulations. Yeah, I think we're getting close to the end here. I can't see how they could possibly prop up the U.S. economy any longer. They're waving scary, false monsters at us to try and keep us distracted. But the reality is, we all live and we all vote with our wallets. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I want to talk about something that sort of came up in the last few days, which is a little bit alarming. And I want to start off by saying that last March there was an article which reported that the drop in the U.S. birth rate is the biggest in 30 years. Now, this kind of caught my eye originally because normal behavior of the human race during times of severe stress is for the birth rate to go up, because the instincts to perpetuate the species kind of kick in. People respond to stress with an enhanced reproductive drive. And not having a lot of money to go out and do other hobbies, staying home and, grabbing the spouse is, sort of goes up by default. So that's the kind of the normal trend looking back in history. And all of a sudden, where we have this incredible destruction of the American economy, and all of a sudden we're seeing this record drop in the U.S. birth rate, and start scratching the head and go, Then we stumble across this article. Apparently, some 10 years ago, there is this company that got a lot of funding. Epicite is their name. They're in San Diego. They're a biotechnology company, and what they have produced is a genetically engineered corn which also sterilizes any humans who eat it. They took antibodies from women with a rare condition where their bodies would respond to impregnation as if it was an infection and basically prevent pregnancy. And they put this gene into the corn. And they had this up and running about 10 years ago. And we've got these articles linked to whatreallyhappened.com, where they talk about children of the corn and sterilizing corn, and they had this stuff for 10 years ago. Apparently, a lot of this corn is being sent to third world countries through grants from the Gates Foundation. We know that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are all gung-ho about trimming off the population of planet Earth by, if necessary, covert means, vaccination, and now they have this corn. And nobody's even talking about, do you have the permission of these third world countries to go in and basically destroy future generations? Now, I'll be one of the first people to acknowledge that overpopulation is a problem, especially because British Petroleum has killed the Gulf of Mexico fishing grounds, and General Electric and TEPCO are doing the same thing to the North Pacific. There isn't enough safe, uncontaminated food to feed the human population. My issue is, if you are one of those people who feel that the human population is really too great and needs to be trimmed, kindly remove yourself from the gene pool. My issue is with these very rich people who have managed to become very rich, usually on the backs of the human population, by the way of customers of Microsoft, and all of a sudden they get enough money and they start thinking, wouldn't the world be better off without all these extra people floating around? And they start spending their money to basically engage in these kinds of projects. And I think it's very, very alarming, because this is a very dangerous technology. We already know from other accidents within the field of genetically modified crops that genes do not stay in the engineered plant. A good example would be the Roundup Ready gene that was supposed to allow plants to survive being dosed with these glyphosate weed killers. And so farmers would buy these very expensive genetically modified seeds, on credit, of course, and they'd plant them, the crops would come up, and they'd dose the fields with the glyphosate weed killer, and all the weeds would go away and the plants would stay there. That's the design agenda. But a couple of things have happened. First of all, the genetically modified crops do not have the yields that their natural counterparts have. So they didn't have as much crop to sell, and a lot of farmers got into trouble because they couldn't pay back the loans for the seed. Over in India, hundreds of thousands of farmers have committed suicide because they were encouraged by their government to buy these genetically modified seeds. The seeds did not produce a saleable crop, and they lose their land. They lose their land to the banks that loaned them the money for these damaged seeds. But here's where it gets really interesting, because it turns out this gene that made the genetically modified crops immune to the weed killer has jumped species. It's gotten into the weeds through cross-pollination and natural hybridization. And so now these farmers have these very expensive seeds, which they have to buy year after year. They don't reproduce. They've got lower yields, and they still have a weed problem. In fact, the weed problem is worse than before because there's nothing that will kill these new weeds. So now we find out that for 10 years, this country has been growing this corn, which, if it's eaten by humans, will sterilize the women prevent them from conceiving. And we're seeing our birth rates in the United States start to decline. Is this intentional? Or has this gene from this experimental corn, which has been around for 10 years, has it escaped into the wild and started contaminating other corn crops? We know that when genetic engineering started, there was a move to go out and try and claim samples of uncontaminated plants. And they sent an expedition up to the tallest mountains in Mexico to get seeds from the wild maize before contamination could happen, and they got there too late. These wild crops of corn up in the tops of the Mexican mountains had already been pollinated with pollen from genetically modified crops. This is an incredibly dangerous thing they're playing with, and they've been playing with it for apparently 10 years, and now we're seeing that the U.S. population, the birth rate, has gone into a major decline. Now, if this gene from this corn, this sterilizing corn, has gone wild and broken free, there's no getting it back. And I think we need to be paying attention to this. Yes, Fukushima is a disaster, and it's a huge disaster, and it's going to take a long time to clean it up. But genetic engineering accidents, once they break free, they're everywhere on the planet. I can't believe that somebody decided it was going to be really cool to make corn that sterilizes any people that eat it. And they're all up there saying, yes, this will cure world population problems. Yeah, it might do it permanently. Especially here in the United States of America, where the law says they don't have to label genetically modified crops as such. You don't know what you're eating when you're getting a tortilla or corn chips, your little snack chips made out of corn that have this gene in them. This is very, very dangerous if this gets loose, and it may already be getting loose. If this birth rate continues to drop, we've got a major problem. And you know, it almost reminds me of this book. The last of the Tom Clancy books that I really enjoyed reading was called Rainbow Six. And it was all about these super rich people who got together and decided the world would be so much better if, you know, that 99% of the population who were poor were to die off. Now, nobody's thinking about doing that, obviously, but what we're looking at is a world which in the next generation will see virtually no birth rate whatsoever. We're tinkering with things without really good controls and really good... This is all being done privately. This is this company in San Diego, and it's the Gates Foundation, you know, buying the corn and shipping it all over the place. And they're very reckless, and it's money junkie thinking, and we've got to be paying attention to this. We really, really do. Now, another thing they're getting ready to do is, as you know, the government loves to add chemicals to our drinking water. We got to take a break. Music means commercial. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back talking about lithium. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about drinking water, and we're talking about chemicals in the drinking water at the insistence of the government, which, for those of you who've read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, we're kind of getting into familiar territory. Obviously, it all began with chlorine, which legitimately was designed to prevent the growth of bacteria in the plumbing system, which could lead to illnesses. Then it was followed up with fluoride, which was very, very controversial because it was added to the water ostensibly to help fight tooth decay. And research has shown that while topically applying fluoride to the teeth does help delay the decaying process by killing the bacteria, simply drinking fluoride in the water has no effect whatsoever on your teeth. None at all. So why do they keep doing it? Well, it turns out fluoride is actually a very mild tranquilizer. It keeps you kind of calm down. So if you're wondering why everybody seems to like not be feeling any anger at the state of the country, that may be one reason. Now, we're seeing this push where psychiatrists are recommending that the U.S. government add lithium to drinking water. Now, lithium is what they give crazy people to calm them down. And they're saying, well, if we put lithium in the drinking water, there'll be no crime and there'll be no violence and everybody will be happy. And what they're doing is they're afraid of a revolution. They're afraid that what happened in Egypt could happen right here in the United States of America. And it could. We're really close. And so, and waving Osama bin Laden at us didn't do anything. Obviously, now they've tried to pretend they killed him off. That cratered. Looks like the economy is going to start unraveling, and that's when people are really going to get angry. When they can't get food, when they can't get fuel, when the last of the jobs evaporate, that's when people are going to start tying those nooses. And so the latest government plan is they're going to put lithium in the drinking water to keep you doped up. Soma, soma, soma. And it's a very, very scary situation here when they're literally putting psychiatric medication in your drinking water because they're afraid you might actually get angry over the way the country has been managed. All right, we're getting up to the top of the hour here. Phone lines are still open, 877-342-6633. And I want to talk about Macintosh computers. Now, obviously, we're all using a lot of computers. We have Linux systems, and we've got Windows, and I got a VistaBox over here, and I got a this over there, and all the rest of it. And every time we suffer some kind of computer hacking attack, like our servers got hacked a couple of times this last month, inevitably the Macintosh users will chime in and say, oh, you should have a Mac. We're immune from viruses. And actually, no, they weren't. There just weren't enough Macintoshes there to make it worthwhile for the computer criminals to try and do something. And now, all of a sudden, because of aggressive marketing and the fact that they are really nice machines, there are enough Macintoshes where the computer criminals are saying, yeah, maybe it's worth our while to go in and start doing identity theft. Because after all, demographically, Mac owners tend to have a little bit more money. They're buying the high-end machine. They're a little more expensive than Windows machines. So it's a target-rich environment. And what's going on here is all of these Mac users who were sitting there. So, we're retraining. Did you just do something? You turned your what? Leave it. Okay, I think I'm there. There we are. We're back on the air here. Okay. Yeah, this is a problem. Anyway, to get back to the situation, Macintosh users have been living under this illusion that they're somehow safe from viruses, when the reality was they weren't worth noticing. Now they are. And worse, people who have Macintoshes are really kind of innocent babes in the woods when it comes to hackers and computer crime. And they're not prepared. They're certainly not compared to us battle-scarred Windows users who've had to deal with this stuff for years and years, and out of force of necessity have become quite good at computer security. And so the problem is really starting to get out there, and I don't like to see anybody suffer at the hands of the computer users. But I just wanted to point out, and as I've been saying all along, the solution to computer crime is to go after the computer criminals. I mean, we've got the TSA at the airport, billions of dollars, hands down the front of our pants, and they haven't ever caught a real terrorist. Computer crime is costing the United States of America tens of billions of dollars every single year, and the government just can't seem to be bothered about it. And maybe now that the Macintosh users are feeling the wrath of the computer criminals and starting to feel that pain and having their credit cards stolen, that maybe they'll start coming on board, and instead of saying, oh, you should have a Macintosh, they'll agree that maybe the time has come for the computer criminals to be treated the way the U.S. Army treats any Arab wearing a cheap Casio watch. Because when you have enough machines, the computer criminals will say, hey, that's interesting. I can make money going after those. And that's what happened. Apparently, Apple's new antivirus signatures survived just a few hours before the malware authors found a way around them. Apple and Mac are not prepared to deal with this crisis now that they've been recognized to be a target-rich environment by the computer criminals. The Macs were never inherently immune to viruses. They were simply beneath the criminals' notices. Now you're all sitting ducks and babe in the woods. And maybe now, instead of saying my machine is better than your machine, you'll come to understand the real problem are the computer criminals. And it's time to go after them and treat them the way they deserve. They cause far more damage to the United States of America than your average, hold-up artist at the 7-Eleven or even your average bank robber. In fact, the only criminal class that causes more damage to America than computer criminals is Wall Street. And it's time to go after them. It's time to deal with that situation here. All righty, let's see. Do we have any callers? Wait, no, we don't. Okay. All righty, let's see. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this Dominique Strauss-Kahn situation. It's kind of amazing where as soon as this guy was reported to the police, immediately we saw this huge propaganda effort to blame the woman, say, oh, bankers don't do that kind of thing. And then we found out the woman may have been infected with AIDS. We're still waiting to find out if Strauss-Kahn acquired the illness from her. But what's really interesting is that over in Europe, the finger-pointing has begun. Because apparently Dominique Strauss-Kahn's latest defense is, well, we all do it. That's one of the perks of being head of an international banking cartel, is we're allowed to do these kind of things and get away with it. And the fingers are starting to point, and other French politicians are starting to feel the wrath of the public embarrassment that they have some very unconventional lifestyles behind those Brooks Brothers suits. And it's rather interesting in that it reminds me very much of a scandal we had here in the United States of America not too long ago called the Franklin scandal. And the Franklin scandal basically involved the Bush White House, the Boys Town Orphanage, a savings and loan, and a very powerful political operative. And there was a whole TV show, a whole documentary made about this thing. It went right to the top. And it was scheduled to be on TV. It was even in TV Guide. And Congress basically came over and said, if you run that show, we will pass all kinds of laws to make your business impossible to conduct. And so the show was yanked and was never seen. Fortunately, an editor's copy was leaked and is available online. It's at the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. And it kind of gets us back to this idea that maybe the problem with political power is that it attracts the very sort of people who shouldn't be allowed to have it. I mean, when the United States was founded, being a legislator was a part-time thing. It was a hobby. All of the people in the government had their own businesses. They were publishers or silversmiths or insurance salesmen or lawyers, or Washington had a distillery at Mount Vernon. And the government was just kind of a part-time thing, and it was an honor to be there, but it wasn't this permanent, enshrined ruling class. But we've made our government offices so attractive that people will do anything to get them. And of course, that attracts the kind of people who, once they have that kind of power, are going to do anything with it. And monetary power is exactly the same thing. The people who are at the top of these institutions very often prove themselves to be very, very evil people, whether it's Ken Lay over at Enron, or Bernie Madoff with his little Ponzi scheme, or Dominique Strauss-Kahn. We need to stop seeing these ultra-powerful and ultra-rich people the way they want us to see them, and we need to see them as they really are. They didn't get to these positions by being nice people. Alrighty, let's see. We're coming up here on the end of the show, and I thought Jeff Rentz was actually going to pop in, and I wanted to say hi to him and thank him for the opportunity to be on his network. Like I said, we do have these technical issues. We're going to try and get around them and have a somewhat cleaner and better and more professional show for you tomorrow. And looking forward to basically continuing here with Rentz and getting the word out there. And I certainly appreciate the new time slot. And I'm already getting email from people saying, oh, yes, we're catching your show, and it's more relaxed because it's in the evening. And we're having a really, really good time dealing with that. Ultimately, of course, we need to remember that our mission at whatreallyhappened.com and here at Rentz Radio, we're trying to basically call off this rush toward World War III. And we know that because there isn't really a compelling reason for us to go to war for the ordinary people, that the money junkies who seek to profit from war have to trick us into it. And we need to be aware of that very, very much so in the coming days and the coming weeks. The money junkies make money off of war. They don't even care which side wins. That's why you had people like Prescott Bush and Brown Brothers Harriman were financing Hitler in the run-up to World War II. They didn't care which side won, because both sides have to go into debt. And debt is what gives the money junkies power over the rest of us. That's it for our show. We'll be back tomorrow, same time here on the Rense Radio Network, hopefully with all of our technical issues fixed. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and aloha, America.